Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Nichelle Wilson, Neighborhood Training and Development Program Manager, and we are here tonight for a workshop entitled, Should Our Neighborhood Association Become a Nonprofit? Tonight, we are joined by Rocky Kavanaugh. He's attorney at law with Hull & Chandler, and so I will go ahead and turn it over to Rocky. Rocky has a lot of experience in this area, so we're going to learn a lot tonight. Rocky?
Thank you, Michelle. Well, first of all, very privileged to be able to present for you tonight on here with our great partnership with Housing and Neighborhood Services with the City of Charlotte. As she said, I've got a lot of experience involved with neighborhood associates becoming nonprofits because, in many respects, I was the clinical director of the Community Economic Development when Charlotte had a law school, and for 5 years we helped neighborhoods come up with that decision of whether to incorporate and become nonprofits. So many of the neighborhoods in the area, the Enderley Park neighborhood, the Reed Park Neighborhood Association, Greer Heights, some of these neighborhoods that you've heard of got assistance from our legal clinic, either helping them become nonprofits or, in some respects, helping them keep their nonprofit status. So obviously, I am an attorney, so I have to give you this legal disclaimer that today's presentation shouldn't be taken to be legal advice. Nothing that I'm going to say to you should make you imply that we have any kind of attorney-client relationship. So that's just kind of the disclaimer. I think we got something here in the chat. Oh, we have 4 parts. Oh, well, awesome. Well, that is great to hear. So welcome to the 4 participants who are here. I hope that be sure to use your chat if you want to ask questions. We're just getting started, so I'm just getting through my legal disclaimer. So I'll just get that out of the way. All right. So now we're going to talk about this question about your neighborhood association or your neighborhood and whether you should become actually incorporated, become a nonprofit, whether you should become a tax-exempt organization. So the question, should we transform our neighborhood association into a nonprofit tax-exempt organization? As you're going to learn, there's 2 separate things. One is whether you should become a nonprofit, and 2, whether if you become a nonprofit, you should become a tax-exempt organization, a tax-exempt nonprofit. So we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of formalizing your group by incorporating with your state, your state of North Carolina, and then applying for tax-exempt status with the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. So let's get started here. So do we need to file any paperwork to start operating as a nonprofit organization? Well, you'd be surprised. Here in the state of North Carolina, no. What? No. You don't need any paperwork to start operating as a nonprofit organization because North Carolina has an Unincorporated Nonprofit Association Act on its books. Now, basically, if you meet what the definition under the statute of an unincorporated nonprofit association, you can get some of the benefits that a legally incorporated nonprofit has. So let's look at an example. So under this Unincorporated Nonprofit Act, basically, think about this. If 2 or more people meeting an association together regarding a typically not-for-profit purpose, such as a community or neighborhood or community togetherness, the state of North Carolina will recognize you as an unincorporated nonprofit. So you would have a legal standing. So some of the benefits of already being of 2 or more of you meeting in association for a typically nonprofit purpose, such as neighborhood or community togetherness or revitalization, is the organization would be regarded as a separate legal entity from its members. Oh, got a question here. Oh, cool. All right, let's keep going here. And the organization can hold property, transfer property's name. The organization can sue in its own name. It can get its own tax ID number and open up a bank account. The organization could inherit assets in its own name. So yes, you can already, if you haven't even filed paperwork, the state most likely, if there's at least 2 or more of you doing things in your neighborhood, probably already sees you as an unincorporated nonprofit association. So you might be asking the question, well, if we in North Carolina have such an act that I don't have to incorporate, why should we go ahead and incorporate them? So first off, from the legal standpoint, most states that do have these acts, like North Carolina, don't have a lot of case law on the matter. And if you don't have a lot of case law, it's hard to know what a court would treat your unincorporated nonprofit if it actually faced a legal issue. There isn't a lot of case law related to unincorporated nonprofits. Well, let's see here. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Davis. So there isn't a lot of case law related now to unincorporated nonprofits. So if you are just kind of meeting and just sort of freely associating, sometimes they call it the mutual aid or something like that, there isn't a lot of case law about that. However, if you do incorporate, there is a lot of case law related to incorporated nonprofits in this state and every other state in the country. So, you know, it's $60 to incorporate, and maybe we'll have some slides about that later. It's just a lot easier, I think, to have some legitimacy if you just incorporate your nonprofit. So now there are some folks out there who have some philosophical issues about the state, right? So groups that are maybe more into mutual aid, sometimes they might be referred to as anarchists or something of that nature. I mean, people who really do not want to have the state involved may very well want to just avoid the paperwork of filing to become a nonprofit. But I would say most groups and most neighborhoods probably would benefit from actually incorporating as a nonprofit. All right. And then the other thing is that if you are looking around your community and your neighborhood, and you might look and see, oh, well, Home Depot has like a grant that it'll give to nonprofits to help you do some community revitalization. They're not going to give money to an unincorporated nonprofit. So just because the state of North Carolina will recognize the legal existence of a unincorporated nonprofit, that doesn't mean that your funders out there, from governments to foundations like the Home Depot Foundation or the Kaboom Foundation, are going to respect that you are an unincorporated nonprofit. In fact, they probably will not allow you. You'll be disqualified from applying for that kind of money. So that will be another reason to go ahead and highly consider becoming an incorporated nonprofit. And like I said here in the bottom, it's relatively cheap to formally incorporate here in North Carolina, $60. And the nice thing about North Carolina nonprofit corporations, there is no annual report or annual fee like there are in other states. So I used to practice law in the state of Florida. The state of Florida has an annual report requirement for all nonprofits. And there's also, at the time, it was something like $125. It's probably more now. It's been 10 years since I lived there. So you would imagine that having to be on the books and not just paying that entry fee, like becoming registered, but then also an annual fee. And if you fail to do the annual fee, then you would get what they call administratively dissolved. So the thing about North Carolina nonprofits, it's relatively cheap, $60, and you don't have the reoccurring annual report fee like other states do. Okay. So if your state doesn't have an unincorporated nonprofit, we should definitely incorporate. Well, yes, definitely. If you don't have the Unincorporated Nonprofit Association Act, you should incorporate. Now, this slide probably is not as important to you because you would be seen as unincorporated, but I would say that definitely, you do have those protections here in North Carolina. But if you are from a state, or you know some folks, or you go into a state that doesn't have an Unincorporated Nonprofit Association Act, then you should definitely incorporate, because if you do not incorporate and you don't have the Unincorporated Association Act, then you could be on the hook for a lot of things in your personal life. So what I mean by that is, let's imagine you want to do some mutual aid, you want to help bring food to some elderly folks who can't, leave their houses, kind of like a Meals on Wheels. So y'all get together and you start making decisions to help feed these hungry people. And one of you gets in the car, but then gets in a wreck. Now, if you're not incorporated and they don't see you as a corporation, then they're going to sue all of you, because they're going to see you all as like a partnership. And so not only are they going to sue all of you in your group, they're going to go after all of your personal assets. So that's why we incorporate, because if you incorporate then a person who is suing can only go after the assets of the incorporated entity. So that's the main reason why people incorporate. Under the Unincorporated Association Act, you could still have some protection from limited liability, but again, it's always better if you're doing things in the community, you're holding yourself out as a blankety blank association, you should probably go ahead and get incorporated. That's not the full story, but it's definitely the first step that you should do. So again, so I mentioned, how do you incorporate as a nonprofit corporation in your state? Well, it does vary from state to state, but generally, as you do here in North Carolina, you will file something called Articles of Incorporation. And again, it's a document, you can download it. You can even do it online now. Just if you have a credit card or a debit card, you can pay for it. And you can do it online, or you can download the form from the Secretary of State's website. It's even in a PDF form where you can even just type in whatever you need to and then print it out and mail it back to them if need be. Again, it's typically 50 on average around the states. Here in North Carolina, it's 60. What you'll see in these articles of incorporation, it just lists all the fundamental terms of the corporation. So the articles will say the name, its address. It will list who the registered agent is for service of process. That's a person who is a real, actual human who is in a very physical location that has been appointed by you to accept lawsuits. So if someone sues your corporation, they don't just, how do they find you? Well, you have to have a registered agent in each state. You may have the list of initial directors, because if you have a corporation, you need a board of directors. A nonprofit corporation is no different. There are board of directors requirements to have for a nonprofit corporation. You may have the name of the incorporator, who normally is the person who cuts the check to pay that $60. You have to determine whether you're a membership or non-membership. Now, I'm going to hold your questions on that, and we're going to talk about the critical difference between a membership and a non-membership nonprofit. And they do ask you when you apply to be a North Carolina nonprofit, whether you're a membership or a non-membership. And in North Carolina, they will also ask whether you are a charitable or a religious nonprofit as well. Now, if you're not, then you just check the box that says, I'm not, but it is an important distinction to know. So again, it is going to be critical to know whether your nonprofit is a membership or a non-membership. So I think I got a good slide here, a difference between a membership or a non-membership nonprofit, because I think that I think most of you in community organizations will probably want to be a membership nonprofit, right? Which is typically nonprofits which tend to rely upon membership fees, and the members themselves have voting rights, which would be set forth in your bylaws. And I have some slides about what bylaws are. And then some bylaws will allow members the right to vote on board members, while others grant the right to vote on only on specific matters. So the best way to think of a membership nonprofit is a church. People who attend the church are the members, and the members have the right to vote on, major things, like if you have a new pastor, typically they would pass, you get a chance to vote on those issues, right? So so that's kind of the membership nonprofit. And then the non-membership is sort of how the vast majority of nonprofits here in the Charlotte area are set up as non-membership nonprofits, which basically means that they don't have a membership, they're board driven, meaning that the board of directors is the dominant party. In a membership nonprofit, the membership is a dominant party. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this a little bit is that this could become an issue in some of your neighborhood associations, because I bet you that most neighborhood associations will probably be set up as membership nonprofits, but they might be operating or want to be operated as a non-membership, where the board is making all decisions and deciding all of the, the replacement members of the board, amending the bylaws and that such. Just understand that if you're currently in a neighborhood association and you are already incorporated and you want to know whether you're a membership or a non-membership nonprofit, just go to the Secretary of State's website. Just Google, I always put this to find it out. I put NC space Corp, CORP space search. And I put that in there, and I go right to the Secretary of State's website, and you can search the name of your neighborhood association or your homeowner association, and you can see, and you'll be able to download in a PDF form your articles of incorporation that were filed. And then you can look and see whether you're a membership or a non-membership nonprofit. Because I'll tell you this, a membership nonprofit actually gives legal rights to the membership. So you have bylaws, and they may state this, but in the statute itself, in North Carolina statutes 55A, there are a list of rights that if you are a member of a membership nonprofit, you have. Those rights include inspection rights, the right to inspect the numbers, meaning you can ask to look and see the finances of the organization that you're a member of by law. You can also request, if enough members, they can request a special meeting of the organization. Additionally, you can have what are some other rights of membership? Definitely inspection rights, right to ask for the right to get the list of all the members. You can also ask for that. There's some other, so there's a list of rights that you have under the law itself. So that's why I think it's critical to know whether you're truly in a membership nonprofit, because if you are a member in a membership nonprofit that your articles say, then you actually have some legal rights that you can enforce. If you're in a non-membership nonprofit and they just call you a member, but maybe you're just paying dues, but if it's a non-membership, then you don't have those rights to ask for inspection and ask for all these other things. So there are clearly some things to kind of think through as you build out your nonprofit. But I think for legitimacy's sake, it's probably best to set your community-based organization, your neighborhood association, as a membership nonprofit, because then it'll look like you're just giving too much power to your board of directors at that time. So, but those are just things to understand, the difference between these two. Okay, so incorporating a nonprofit is extremely easy. You file something called Articles of Incorporation. You can do it online. It costs $60. And the nice thing about the state of North Carolina is you can keep goofing up on your application. As long as you paid the $60, they'll let you keep writing stuff until you get it right. They may not tell you what to do, but you're not going to just reject you flat out if they take your money. So it's almost, I wouldn't say it's virtually impossible, because maybe you might not, turn in your resubmission in time, but it's pretty hard not to get incorporated if you really set your mind on getting incorporated as a nonprofit. Now, once you've incorporated as a nonprofit, there's some other things you need to get. First thing you probably want to get, and it's not on this slide, is get your tax ID number. So you can go to the IRS website. It's real easy. It actually takes about 5 minutes to do online. You file online something called an SS-4. And you'd file that in the name of the organization that you just started. You'll get and you can get a tax ID number, which then you can go to open up a bank account with. So that's a good thing. Now, other things though, after incorporating your nonprofit, you need to create corporate governance documents. So by far, the most important corporate governance document you're going to develop are called bylaws. Because when you hear the word, remember, you're a nonprofit corporation, so corporate. And then you have governance, because you have to govern the corporation. So your bylaws are going to help you set out the rules on how you govern your nonprofit corporation. I got some other policies here that you'll probably, as your nonprofit becomes more mature and sophisticated and has, more assets and other, maybe employees or something, then that would be the case. But definitely, no matter if you just stay a volunteer organization, you definitely need a good set of bylaws. And I'd also say a good conflict of interest policy as well would be highly recommended to have. So the bylaws, again, so what are they? Maybe if you're already in an organization, you might have some bylaws, or maybe you've lost the bylaws, or maybe they're somewhere. But state nonprofit law does require you to have bylaws. It doesn't say what has to be in them. In fact, the law here in North Carolina basically says something along the lines of nonprofit must have bylaws that are adopted and cannot have anything that is inconsistent with state law. That's basically it. So as long as you don't put anything illegal in your bylaws, like we're going to sell weed or something like that, as long as you don't put something illegal in your bylaws, you more or less can put anything you want in your bylaws, right? So number one, you can specify how many directors you want to have on your board of directors. That's something to have on your bylaws, right? So the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits says that 5 to 7 is a good enough number for most nonprofits. You may want more. Bigger neighborhoods may need more representation or less. It depends on what is determined there. In North Carolina, the law says that if you have a nonprofit, you have to have at least one director. So obviously, there's a lot of range there because you're not required to have more than one, but to have legitimacy in a neighborhood, you're probably going to need a lot more than one director on your board of directors. We already said that here. So again, yeah. So here's the thing: if you do not have bylaws, so what if you say, "Oh, we don't have bylaws," then the state has what we call default rules. So, and that's no fun because really your bylaws then become the state statute. So it's probably better to create your own bylaws that state all what you need to do. They're initially adopted at the first meeting of the bylaws. And here's the thing: bylaws are what we call private law. They're legally enforceable once voted upon and approved by the board of directors. I've dealt with cases where people are going to court over failure to follow the bylaws because it's basically a contract. Now, where does it normally happen? A lot of times it is when usually an officer of the board is voted off the board and they did not want to be voted off the board. And so they look at the bylaws to see if the board followed the proper process for before voting them off the board. And so bylaws do have effect. They're not just things you download off the internet just to look at. It has legal effect if your board votes and adopts them. Again, these are your constitution. It has rules pertaining to what I said, directors, whether you have officers, meetings, voting, identification. I do believe, and Michelle can correct me, I do believe that we have a presentation on bylaws that has been recorded already. That's in the sort of archive of neighborhood and housing services, web archive and trainings. But that just will give you a little bit about bylaws. They're really important. And again, some typical bylaws provisions. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time here because we do have another presentation that goes all into bylaws that you can definitely check out if you're looking for some assistance with drafting bylaws. Officers, general provisions. Okay, so this is probably something very important to this neighborhood association, is your board of directors. So again, the state of North Carolina says you only need one. I don't think you're going to get away with having a one-person board of directors for any of your neighborhoods. That's not going to fly. But you need to have a board of directors because it's your leadership. So that clear difference between a membership nonprofit and a non-membership nonprofit is that the membership nonprofit, the parishioners, the members, they get to decide, usually at an annual meeting through some kind of vote, on who is the nonprofit's leadership. They get to decide the board of directors. And in the non-membership nonprofit, the board of directors get to decide who their own successors are. Let's see, got a question here. Okay, oh, there we go. We're going to copy this presentation. Okay. All right, so if you do choose to incorporate as a nonprofit, most states do, obviously, you know to have bylaws, and you need to appoint a board of directors. Again, like I said, North Carolina only requires you to have one. Nonprofit experts say that you should at least have a governing board between 5 and 7. I've always learned this is that there's a 3 W's. So when you're looking to kind of put up your board, you want to have some wealth, wisdom, and workers, the 3 W's. And of course, having a little diversity on your board is a plus. So that's again, like when we get back to that question, why we're here is, should our neighborhood association incorporate? I do think you should incorporate, but if you do incorporate, you do need to create a board of directors because that is by law. So that's why we're kind of talking about this topic here. Now, beyond, appointing people to your board or electing them to your board, these board members will have responsibilities under the law. So, their basic duties, and I've got a few of them coming up here, reading staff reports, pay attention reports, and we're going to go into a little bit deeper into what these basic duties are. They're fiduciary duties. And I'll say this, that if you are a director, you have more responsibility than your common member, right? So if you are on the board of directors of your neighborhood association or homeowner association, or if you're thinking of becoming a director of your neighborhood association or homeowner association, just understand that there are higher legal duties on you than just the regular neighbor, than just a regular person. Because if you are sitting on the board of directors, there are more responsibilities. Again, qualities of effective board members, having some vision, some stewardship, some knowledge. We do go into a little bit about this. We have a presentation on neighborhood succession planning. You may want to check out that video where we do talk about recruiting new board members when you're kind of aging out of leadership. So if you kind of really want to dive into or get some ideas about how do we go about recruiting members, you should check out that particular video, which is part of the Neighborhood and Housing Services Archive. So I keep saying the word fiduciary duty. You do have fiduciary duty. So if you're already on the board, or if you're thinking about joining the board, because again, if you incorporate, you got to have a board. So now if you're on this board, you've got fiduciary duties. Now, North Carolina follows all three. So you see here, there's all states for loyalty, care, and obedience. North Carolina follows all three of these duties. So maybe some other states may not necessarily follow the duty of obedience. We do. So the duty of loyalty, what does this basically mean? So if you are on the board of directors of your neighborhood association or your homeowners association, you cannot put your financial interests in front of the interests of the organization, the homeowner, the association. Your goal with the duty of loyalty is to avoid conflicts of interest, to avoid the appearance of conflicts of interest in any of the decisions that are being made by the organization. So quick example, because we do kind of dive into some other trainings, but basically, if the organization is going to transact business with either you, your spouse, your cousin, your business, if a business that you own or have ownership interest in, that is a potential conflict or overlap of interest. And so really the duty of loyalty ultimately just says that you've got to put the organization's interests ahead of your own. Now, there are situations where if there is an overlap of interest, that the transaction probably would be in the best interest of the organization, but you can't have a say in that. So here's an example. So the neighborhood association wants to have a park. Somebody in the neighborhood who's on your board owns a big plot of land and is willing to let the association use it for free. Well, that's a lot better than paying. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to have, and this is why I said it's important to have a conflict of interest policy. You'd have to run this transaction through your conflict of interest policy. And typically how that would work is the neighbor who's on the board who owns that plot of land would raise their hand and say, I own that land. I'd be happy to let you use it, but I can't be involved with any more decision if this organization is going to enter into an agreement, because that's me. So that person would have to not be part of the decision making, would have to abstain, and you'd have to have minutes, and we may have some discussion about that. I don't really know how deep we're going to get into that. You should have some corporate formalities, some record keeping that shows that when that decision to use that land for the community park was made, that the person who owns the land was not involved in the decision that was made to go into doing that, even though they're on the board. So that's loyalty number one. This is fiduciary duty number one, which is the duty of loyalty. Every state has this, no matter where you go. In North Carolina, absolutely no different. So of course, adopt a conflict of interest policy. We're going to go into IRS applying for tax exempt status, and the IRS really wants you to have an adopted conflict of interest policy because they will ask you about that in the application to become a 501c3. They ask whether you do have a conflict of interest policy. So it's probably better to go ahead and create and adopt one. Duty of care, which is the second fiduciary duty, is in all states, including, of course, North Carolina. A lot of those things that I showed in that one slide back kind of fall into this duty of care. Attending meetings, reading reports, if you see something wrong, speaking up, basically taking care of the nonprofit. So look at this picture here. You've got penguins. The penguins are real cute. You got the little baby penguin, and you got the two sort of parental penguins. Can you guess exactly who is the nonprofit and who is the board of director member? If you guess that the baby is your nonprofit and the parent penguin is the director, you would be correct. That's all the essence of a duty of care means, is that if you are on the board of directors of your neighborhood or of your homeowner association, not only do you need to be loyal, you need to care. You need to take care of the organization, and in any decisions, you need to exercise care in those decisions. Now, the law only says that you need to exercise the care of an ordinarily prudent person. So what does that mean? That means that you should do your homework. If there's a decision to to purchase a piece of property or to get into a partnership with somebody, you should ask questions. Who are we getting in a partnership with? What kind of land is it? What's this? You need to ask questions. There are no dumb questions. And I know like a lot of people feel intimidated to ask questions in meetings, particularly there's people they don't know as well. But if you are a director on a board of directors and you do not ask questions and you have doubts, you're violating your duty of care because you need to ask questions. Let's see, you got something in the chat here. All right. Oh, okay. It's, feel free to put them in the chat. Of course, Michelle is absolutely correct. Feel free to put any questions in the chat. I took a sip of water here. All right. So, and I think that we might have skipped over the duty of obedience, or maybe it comes up later. Well, I'll go into that though. But what were these corporate formalities I'm talking about? So you got to make decisions and take action properly by resolution. You got to have minutes. I know it's kind of nuts. You got to write down things, but you got to write down, at least when you're doing minutes of your neighborhood association, you don't have to make it a transcript of like everything that everybody said, but you really, and I think I've got some slides on this here. If not, I'll go back, but yeah, so basically when you're doing your minutes, you just need to have the who, what, where, when, and how approach. You need to say when was the meeting, where was the meeting, and who attended, right? And then you just need to sort of have every action that's taken. So, you know, did we adopt the previous meeting minutes? You know, have something that says addresses that. Did we vote to appoint some new members? You should have that in. Did we vote to give some money to another charity? You should have anything that you actually took action on needs to be recorded. That is the essence of corporate formalities. Corporations can't just act like you or I and just wake up one morning, walk outside and go, yeah, I want some breakfast. I'm just going to go to, you know, like breakfast time and get some breakfast. A corporation has an act where we have a resolution to go to breakfast time. All the board of directors said unanimously that we would go, right? So you have to, things that normal people would just do in a corporation, you have to ask and you have to write. So that could be a drawback in your, you know, thinking of whether I want to go ahead and incorporate an organization, because you do need to follow corporate formalities. And this would be something good to have, is the corporate minute book. Now, a lot of folks now with the advent of Dropbox and Google Docs and things are starting to have their corporate minute book online, where directors and some members can access with like a password. But the old school, and what we used to do in the old school law school clinic, and we would work with a neighborhood, is that we would come up with 3-ring binders, give to every director. And inside this 3-ring binder, you would have the following: the articles of incorporation in the front. Next after that, you have the most recently adopted bylaws. After that, you'd have a section with all the minutes of the past meeting. What were the minutes? Every time, a record of every meeting in writing. If you became a 501c3, you'd have that letter, a list of all the board members, or contact info. If you did apply and got a fundraising license, if you're soliciting funds from the public, you need to get a fundraising license. It's called a charitable solicitation license here in North Carolina. Additionally, if you filed your 990s, you should have 3 years of Form 990. Most neighborhood associations are going to qualify to do the extremely simple 990N internet postcard. But if you don't know what the 990 is and you're in a tax-exempt organization, you need to, especially if you're on that board of directors, exercise your duty of care and start asking questions about the 990. Why? Because if an organization, a tax-exempt organization, fails to file their 990 in 3 years in a row, they will lose their tax exemptions, automatically revoked. So you want to be sure that if you're sitting on a board, now if you're on a homeowner association board, you may not need to worry about that, because most homeowner associations are not going to be tax-exempt organizations as well. They might be nonprofits, but they may not be tax-exempt. But a lot of your neighborhood associations, because they serve a more community revitalization interest, if there are tax exempt, they need to be wary of the 990. And then, of course, you should also have the copy of your application for tax exempt status in this corporate book. Okay, I know that's a lot to throw at you, but let's take a deep breath and go to that next step. So talk all about being whether to incorporate or not. Just know that you don't have to, by law, because if you've got more than 2 people operating, the law of North Carolina will view you as an unincorporated nonprofit association. And so you will have some legal limited liability. You'll be able to get a bank account. You'll be able to hold property in the name of the unincorporated association. But on the same side, if you're looking to try to get more funds for your community, most funders are not really thrilled with unincorporated nonprofit associations. And beyond that, most funders are not thrilled with just plain old incorporated nonprofits. They actually will specifically say 501c3. So if you were to apply for, say, the Home Depot, grant, it will say specifically who is eligible, and it will say 501c3 organizations. So if you're not really interested in the benefits of tax-exempt status and just want to be a nonprofit, you could turn off right now. But if you want to learn a little bit more about why you should take your incorporated nonprofit, it's very rare that the IRS will approve an unincorporated nonprofit association's application for tax-exempt status. I've seen it, but it's really rare. And they probably asked a lot of questions. And again, that organization was probably one of these more, anti, state power type organizations that don't really want to have too much to do with the government. But of course, that's kind of a rare set of folks. But the IRS, what is this 501c3? So again, it doesn't take much to become a nonprofit in the state of North Carolina. Why was that? All you had to do is file articles of incorporation, pay $60, and bam, you're a nonprofit. But it is a lot more paperwork to become a tax-exempt organization, a tax-exempt nonprofit. So that's where this notion of a 501c3 comes up. Now, being nonprofit does not automatically mean you're 501c3 exempt with the IRS unless, okay, so there are a couple of exceptions, and your organization may actually fall under this. So So one are churches. So you understand that we have a separation of church and state in our government, in our government's history. And so if you start a church, you do not have to go file paperwork with the IRS to get tax exempt. You are automatically considered tax exempt by the IRS. Now, a lot of churches, many of these newer churches, not one of your mainline like your Roman Catholic, your AME Zions, your Presbyterians, your Methodists, that are long-standing traditions in America. I'm talking about, like these new churches that show up in YMCA's and stuff. These churches may actually formally apply to get a letter from the IRS that they're tax exempt. A lot of the times because their parishioners, the people who attend them, want to go to their accountants and feel secure that they can ask for a tax deduction on their taxes. So churches, though, generally speaking, are not required to file an application to the IRS to be considered tax exempt. Now, your organization, I bolded this, any organization other than a private foundation normally having gross receipts of not more than $5,000. So many neighborhood associations fall under this exemption, and you would be considered tax exempt. So you're saying, well, hold up, Rocky, you said that Home Depot Foundation wouldn't give me money if I'm not tax exempt. Well, this is in the eyes of the IRS. Okay, so in the eyes of the IRS, you don't actually have to apply if you're under $5,000. Now, you will have to do that 990 that I was telling you about, but you don't actually have to apply. But Home Depot doesn't care about that. Many donors, and you see here, will want to see proof that you're tax exempt. So it's just better to go ahead and get the tax exempt status from the IRS formally. But, if you guys are meeting right now and you're a neighborhood association and you're tax exempt, but when it becomes an issue is when donors want to give you money and they want to have proof to go to the IRS and say that they can, that they can get a tax deduction. That need for proof of tax exempt status is what usually drives most organizations, such as churches and neighborhood associations, to have to go and do all the paperwork to become a tax exempt 501c3. So let's talk a little bit about these 501c3s. So first of all, you're this number. Remember, we start from the start. You decide to become a nonprofit. We went and incorporated. We have a nonprofit corporation. Then we went and obviously we got a board of directors and we found some bylaws and all this other stuff. But now we're getting into the world of tax exempt organizations. So this is a designation. It's like a title, right? So it's kind of like almost like a certification, right? So you're a regular person and I got certified to code, or I got certified to be a trucker. You have to get a special certification above and beyond whatever you normally have. Same thing with tax exempt organizations. A public charity and a private foundation, these are all nonprofits that were incorporated in their own state, but then they applied to IRS and they got designation as a 501c3, but they were either determined as a public charity or private foundation. You want to be a public charity is what you want, because they get favorable tax treatment and are subject to less burdensome oversight operating requirements. And of course, donations to public charities receive more favorable tax treatment. So it's not the end of the world if the IRS thinks you're a 501c3 private foundation, but if you're a neighborhood association, you want to be a 501c3 public charity. Again, private foundations are charities that are not public charities, right? So what do I mean by that? So if you apply to the IRS and you want to be a public charity, but you didn't pass the test to look like a public charity, the IRS will then default you to being a private foundation. So let's talk about what a 501c3 public charity is. So you can't get the tax exempt status and all of this stuff. So when you apply as your neighborhood association, incorporated as a nonprofit corporation in your state, and you're asking for 501c3 status from the IRS, this is what you're essentially asking and trying to prove to the IRS, that you are an organization, you are a corporation, right? So you are a corporation. You filed your articles of incorporation at $60 to become this corporation. But here's the kicker. You're organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, or educational purposes, or for the prevention of cruelty to children and animals. And there's some other things about international competition and some other things where those ellipses are. So you might be asking, so this is one of the main reasons why a homeowner association is not going to apply to be a 501c3 public charity, because they're not charitable organizations. However, the IRS has held that community organizations that are come together that are trying to address blight in the community or community beautification or community togetherness, those organizations can be considered charitable. And so if you are involved with a neighborhood association in the city, in fact, at least 5 to 10 of the neighborhood associations in the city, my law school clinic got 501c3 charity status. And when we applied to the IRS on their behalf, we made the case that these neighborhood associations were charitable and to a certain extent educational, because there would sometimes be educational programs in these neighborhoods, but really charitable because of the community revitalization, the community addressing issues of neighborhood blight aspects. Now, why is this good? Well, because contributions to any organization, whether it's the March of Dimes, the YMCA, or your neighborhood association, if you're a 501c3 public charity, or the contributions are deductible from the donor's taxes. So if your neighborhood association has, an event and people, or has a fundraising drive and you're trying to raise money for a park in your neighborhood, and you come up to me and say, Rocky, we're doing this. And I pull out my checkbook and I make sure that you're a 501c3 public charity. You gave me your name. I looked on the IRS website. You're in good shape. I write you a check for $100. Boom. I can then take that receipt that you give me, because I'll make sure you give me a receipt that I gave you, $100, and I go to my tax person and I can say, I want you to list this in my itemized deductions here. I gave money to this neighborhood association. So you can see why the 501c3 is a very attractive designation, because when people give you money, they get tax deductions for it. So it's not just pure charity in certain respect, because they're able to write this off on their taxes. Of course, the donor should advise, should consult their tax advisor. And of course, if anybody asks how much they can deduct or anything, don't ever answer. Just show them the letter that you have and let them know that they need to consult their own tax advisor on what the amount of deduction actually is. Because there are some differences, and we could go into that, but we won't go into that right now. So, aside from deductibility of individual donations, the other major advantage of being a 501c3, and I think we've talked about this a number of times, is receiving grants from foundations and government agencies, which generally only award grants to 501c3 groups. Now, I'm going to kind of open up the ideas here a little bit. We just come through COVID. I know, and it's like, okay, he's going into COVID. What is he doing this? Well, the federal government has distributed a lot of what they call the American Rescue Plan. It was like when Biden became president, it was like the ARP. There's a lot of money that has been transferred to local governments, and local governments can distribute this money to a lot of groups with money. They can also distribute this money to 501c3s. So if you're in your neighborhood and you want some money to kind of do something in your community for community development purposes, you might be able to request some of that money to do something in your neighborhood. But I guarantee you that the cutoff will be for 501c3. So if you were thinking, well, man, becoming incorporated as a nonprofit was a big deal, and now I'll become a 501c3, well, there are some really strong benefits. And one of them is to receive grants or be eligible to receive grants from foundations and government agencies. Because if you do look at their eligibility. Now, I'll tell you this, you can, if you go to your local branch of the public library, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library has a great partnership with, it used to be called the Foundation Center, but now I think it's called Candid, but it has free access to any patron of the library to one of the world's greatest grant search engines. And you can start to look up grants that may apply to your neighborhood if you're a 501c3. And when you look at those requests for proposals, where the big funders, the blankety blank foundations or whatever, they'll tell you where they've given money. So if they've given money in North Carolina or in the Charlotte area, that's always good to see. But then you also see the eligibility, and almost all of them will say, are you a 501c3? So if you want to play in the grant game and try to see if you can get grants, you're going to have to bite the bullet and become a 501c3. And some other nice things, if you're a 501c3, is that you might be exempt from, obviously in North Carolina, you're exempt from paying state corporate tax. You're not exempt from sales tax as a 501c3 in North Carolina, but you can get a you can get a refund of all sales tax that you've paid. So what I mean by that is, so in Florida, it's a different law. If you are a 501c3 and you go to Walmart, you're buying stuff for your nonprofit, you go to Walmart, you buy a bunch of stuff, you show them the letter, they won't add sales tax because you're totally exempt from paying sales tax as a 501c3 in Florida. In North Carolina, you're not exempt, but you're allowed a refund. So if you do go to Walmart and you buy things for your 501c3 here in North Carolina, you need to keep the receipt. And then at the end of your year, you take all your receipts that you paid money and you isolate all the times you paid sales tax and you add all of that up. And you file a form with the North Carolina Department of Revenue and you submit that with the receipts, and they will write you a check for all the amount of sales tax that you paid that year. Not quite as easy and clean as the Florida example, but you can, so you're not technically exempt, but you are allowed a refund of any monies that you expended for sales tax in North Carolina. If you're a 501c3 and you own property that's for a charitable purpose, you may be exempt. You can go to the county and ask for an exemption from paying what they call ad valorem property tax. So there's some really strong benefits to being a 501c3 organization. And again, like I said, for exclusively or charitable, religious, and of course, I think the slide is redundant. All right. So I don't know if I've got you sold on becoming a tax-exempt organization, but if I have, then let's talk about the steps that you got to go through to obtaining tax-exempt status for your nonprofit. And I hope you can kind of tell the theme here is the major con of going through all this is just the amount of paperwork and compliance that you have to deal with. Because remember, we started with that choice of whether you wanted to incorporate or not. Luckily, you live in the state of North Carolina that does have an Unincorporated Nonprofit Association Act. So if you want to stay on that route, there's not a lot of paperwork, not a lot of compliance. You can just sort of live your life as an unincorporated nonprofit association. A little bit more paperwork, of course, is when you incorporate to become a nonprofit in North Carolina. But like I said, the good thing is there's no annual report. So you could just be a incorporated nonprofit, just pay the $60 and fill out your what's the word I'm looking for, your articles of incorporation. But like I said, if you do incorporate, then you do need to fall under what they call 55A of North Carolina, and you have to create a board. And if you're on the board, then all those things I talked about, fiduciary duties and corporate formalities, kick in. Now, if you're looking to get more resources, meaning money for your association, for your community, then your best bet is to become a 501c3, because that's that next step. So incorporated nonprofit, that's good, but then you got to master that. But then you got to apply to become a tax-exempt status, and then you got to keep compliance with that. We'll talk about the compliance in a second. So let's go ahead and let's see what we got to do to incorporate. So, I mean, to become tax exempt. So number one, you have to incorporate your nonprofit, number one. And so I said that was average is 650. It's 60 here in North Carolina. Now let's rewind a little bit. I said you got to file articles of incorporation just to become a nonprofit. Well, the IRS will want you to have some what I call magic language in your articles of incorporation. Now, the nice thing about North Carolina is that you can download a page and you can add language, even on the online version, that will satisfy the IRS's requirement for the magic language. But if you are doing your own articles of incorporation for your nonprofit, and you do believe you're going to want to become a 501c3 one day, you need to have the magic language. So it's better to, what I was saying, it's better to have and not need than to need and not have. So if you're going to go incorporate based on what I've said, but you're not 100% sold on whether you want to apply to the IRS, you at least want to have the magic language in your articles of incorporation, just in case you make that decision. So you don't have to go back and amend your articles of incorporation, pay extra fees, like $25 to do what you probably could have just put in from the jump, right? So it's better to have and not need than need not have. So make sure you have the IRS language in your articles of incorporation, even if you don't, maybe because maybe 5 years from now you want to become tax exempt. And again, in most states, you will need to manually add this language to the articles. Like I said, here in North Carolina, if you do the 501c, I mean, you do the nonprofit articles online, they will give you the option of adding the magic language. I highly recommend you take advantage of adding the magic language to your articles of incorporation. And then, of course, after you get your certified articles of incorporation, as I mentioned earlier, go to the IRS website, get yourself an employment identification number, use a very simple SS4 online, takes 5 minutes. Why do you need an employment identification number? That'll be your social security number to the IRS, because they're going to kick your application to the curb if you do not have an employment identification number on your application. So you definitely need that. And then, of course, once your nonprofit has voted, because remember, you got to vote to even apply for tax-exempt status, because remember I talked about this corporate formalities. Any decision that you make needs to be in writing as a corporation, and this is no different. Then you're going to need to determine whether you're going to use a Form 1023 or the new 1023 Easy. It's not that new anymore. I guess it's just the 1023 Easy. The Form 1023 is a lot more detailed, and I'm going to show you the difference between the two. The nice thing is both can be done online. And since the 1023 has moved online, it's gotten a lot simpler than the old paper 1023. I'll put it this way. In the old days, when I would do a 1023, I'd have a good 50 pages of just stuff in that application for a client. And it would even be a neighborhood group, right? But in 1023 Easy is pretty simple. But here's some, hold on a second here. I have the sheet. Yeah, so let me just, I'll go back to there. But here are the big differences. So 1023, you do need to, if you want to do 1023 Easy, you need to go to the instructions, and there will be a checklist at the back of the instructions to the 1023 Easy. It's a whole different PDF you can download. You need to go through that checklist and make sure you meet it. If you're a neighborhood association, I'm 95% positive you're going to meet the eligibility to do the 1023 Easy. This is a much easier application. I would stress much easier than Form 1023, and it's cheaper. And it's cheaper because it's much easier. It's $275. It can be filed online and paid with a credit card. Now, the Form 1023 is, you have to do this if you're not eligible to do the 1023 Easy. This is a lot more paperwork. It's $600. It will ask other questions. It's not just checkbox X, yes or no, as you have in the 1023 Easy. It asks for board information, history, your financials, a lot of other stuff. as of January 2020, though, this can be done online now and pay with a credit card. So it's not as, formal as the old days. Now, I bet you're licking your chops thinking, oh man, definitely gonna do that Form 1023 easy. That's nothing. And then if you download it, it looks pretty simple. It's just a lot of check yes, check no. But here's the catch. If you do not answer, even if it's just check yes or no, if you check the wrong yes or you check the wrong no, they're going to come back and ask you more questions. And a lot of the questions are going to look a lot like the stuff here under the third bullet point under Form 1023. They're going to ask for board information, history, financials. They're going to ask for financials and history and things of that nature. So what I will say is that if you get to this point, to do a Form 1023 or Form 1023 easy, I would say this, is that you should probably, definitely for a Form 1023, you should probably get some legal assistance. But even the Form 1023 easy, what I would do is I would do it, and then I would just go to an attorney who has some experience with these forms and just ask them, how much would it cost for you to review my 1023 or my 1023 easy? Now, the 1023 easy, if the attorney says it will take more than maybe they'll just cost you a fixed fee just to review it. They will review it and they'll tell you which boxes, if you check the wrong box, yes or no. The 1023, they'll tell you whether you've missed certain things. So, it probably costs a lot to get them to do it, but it would cost you a lot less if you hire an attorney just to check your work. And of course, if this was 2015 or so in the Charlotte area, then the Charlotte School of Law, Community Economic Development Clinic would still be around, and my students would have been able to do either 1023 or 1023 easy for you, depending whether you were eligible or not. Now, we wouldn't be able to pay the 600 or whatever filing fees, but we would have done the work for you. But there are, some pro bono programs still out there, still other law schools that do this work. But I do think that, here in the Charlotte area, if you want to do one of these two forms, and in 600, obviously that's a lot of money just for that. But then you talk about hiring an attorney. I would just hire the attorney to check it for you and to give you some things. Now, if you can get together the money to hire an attorney, that would be the best bet. But I would probably say the best use of your money, because you just don't want to get caught. The IRS is less forgiving than the state of North Carolina when it comes to filing paperwork. So like I said earlier, if you were to file articles of incorporation, just incorporate nonprofit, and you paid that $60, the folks in Raleigh will let you keep applying until you get it right. In fact, half the time they give you hints on what you need to put into that paperwork. The IRS is not like that. If you goof one of these, they will ask you a lot of questions, and if you can't answer them, they will reject your application and they'll keep your money. So you probably, you want to get, you definitely want to at least take it seriously and get a little more assistance. And again, if you can't afford an attorney, at least pay for the attorney to check your work. So, and some other things here is, again, I think most of the stuff we have covered here. So I will say this in its first bullet here: if you incorporate, don't wait to file for tax-exempt status. If you wait over 27 months, then when you get your letter, it's only going to be the date of your application. But if you do it within 27 months, the tax-exempt date will go all the way back retroactive to the date you filed your article of incorporation with the state. I know that's a lot of words that came out of my mouth there. Just don't wait. So if you incorporate and you're just go ahead and start to work to get your tax-exempt status from the IRS, if that's where you're going. At least definitely don't wait 27 months. You should definitely try to get it done sooner than later. So, any disadvantages to obtaining 501c3? Well, one, it's like I said, it's the paperwork, the complexity, and the compliance. As you move up the ladder, it gets more paperwork, more complexity. So, number one, as a 501c3, there will be annual reporting requirements to the IRS, and that's that Form 990 that I was telling you about. Now, most neighborhood associations are probably not going to gross more than $50,000 every year. I mean, now some of them will, but if you do, you're making, if you're grossing less, meaning you're raising from the public less than $50,000, then you're going to have to do the very simple internet postcard, $9.90. Here's an interesting thing. If you're ever curious to know what other 501c3s, what their financial situation is like, you can go to guidestar.org and you can set up a real free account and just download their 990s, and you can look to see that as well. This last bullet here, tax exemption does limit your ability to engage in legislative activities. It doesn't forbid legislative activities. What I mean is lobbying. So if you become a 501c3, the government doesn't want you using those tax deductible donations just to go lobby them 24/7. So what they say in the law is that an insubstantial amount of your budget can go towards legislative advocacy, lobbying. And when we mean lobbying, we're talking about trying to persuade a sitting elected official to vote on a live bill. So if you went to the city council and you talked to Mayor Lyles, and you said, well, we just want to tell you about our neighborhood and that we're great and we hope you think more about neighborhoods. That's not necessarily lobbying. But if you went there and you said, we want you to vote this way on the UDO or the 2040 plan, then that's lobbying. And you can't use you can only use X amount, I'd say 5 to 10% of your budget to do lobbying if you're a 501c3. And you are absolutely forbidden from electioneering, meaning you cannot support or oppose candidates for political office if you're a 501c3 organization. So you cannot say we are the blankety blank neighborhood and we support the re-election of Mayor Lyles if you are a 501c3. You also can't say we don't want to re-elect Mayor Lyles if you are a 501c3 as well. And after your nonprofit receives a 501c3 tax status, just know that you should check with your state Department of Revenue on how to claim exemption from state corporate income tax. Like I said, the state usually doesn't enforce it, but it's better to do it than not. So I highly advise folks, if it's a simple form with the North Carolina Department of Revenue and you attach your IRS letter to it and you're good, just know that you need to do your 990 every year. If you don't do it every 3 years, you'll lose your tax status automatically. Most likely your state, which includes North Carolina, of course, requires a fundraising license. So if your neighborhood association is going to solicit funds from individuals, you're gonna hold a fundraiser or something, you should look into getting a charitable solicitation license for your neighborhood organization. You most likely will be exempt if everyone is a volunteer and you did not gross more than $25,000 the previous fiscal year. So that is one of the exemptions of having to get the license, but that's there. And then of course, the whole issue with property tax exemption, I think we talked about that earlier. So I know Nichelle had asked me to kind of jump into this a little bit. I know there's some questions about community issues related to development in Charlotte. So I'm going to just do a quick thing here about communities and land use. So really, and I think the question here, and you might have heard this term last spring being kind of said in the media, what is a community benefits agreement? So this is something that if you're in a neighborhood, a community, you may want to know a little bit about. So a CBA, it's a contract between a community, a neighborhood association, a homeowner association, where they negotiate directly with the developer. This is a private contract, and they decide what benefits the community would like to see out of the development project. So you're thinking, well, why would the developer even care to talk to a neighborhood? Well, these can only be effective if the community supports them. So what the developer typically is negotiating for is community support at the planning and zoning area of the development. And so a lot of times a neighborhood can make and break a developer's planned development. And so if a neighborhood, negotiates a contract with the developer that the neighborhood will support your project, but you will, do X, Y, and Z, then you can have an enforceable agreement called a community benefits agreement. So this bottom part here, the community's leverage, you're asking, well, why would a developer want to even talk to a neighborhood is whether the community gets involved in the public zoning process. So organized communities can help a developer or can hurt a developer. So developers usually want to contract with that community for that support. So the way many developers view entering into a CBA, particularly for like really big, things, is they look at it as just another development cost. So there's some very famous community development agreements. I don't know if you were watching basketball last night, but if you were, you watched the Brooklyn Nets get swept by the Boston Celtics. Well, what's the name of the building they're in? It's called the Barclays Center. Well, the Barclays Center is subject to a CBA, a community benefits agreement. So when they were developing the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, the community there entered into an agreement with that developer. So in addition to that big, beautiful basketball arena, there is affordable housing, there's commercial real estate, there's some childcare centers, there's some things surrounding the Barclays Center that developer went ahead and built to get that community support so they could get approval from the planning and zoning of Brooklyn to be able to go ahead and build that Barclays Center. So that's been a topic. I know that currently in Charlotte, there is a community benefits coalition. It's made up of about 30 neighborhoods or so. And they are advocating for community benefit agreements to be used in Charlotte. Now, one of the big things in Charlotte is, and again, I think I mentioned you can ask for grocery stores and other things here. Now, CBAs in Charlotte and North Carolina in general. So obviously, if you probably were under a rock, if you did not hear the term Charlotte Futures 2040 or the 2040 plan a year ago, particularly. The Charlotte Futures 2040 plan does discuss the use of CBAs in the city of Charlotte. Now, the plan, which passed last summer, after much discussion in news media, in fact, some news media that yours truly even got on WBTV or one of those things, that explained exactly what a community benefits agreement was on, I don't know what that guy, Jamie Noble or whatever his name is, on his show. So the plan is going to be implemented what they call the Unified Development Ordinance, which is currently going through a public comment and drafting process prior to the adoption by the city council. Now, one of the main issues are going to be developers by right development versus the community's ability to negotiate a CBA. So one of the things that's in the 2040 plan that's going to come out in this UDO is that a developer can develop certain things by right. So if Arena is in that zone by right, they wouldn't have to go to the community and ask for support to get a Barclays Arena made. If it's by right, then the developer can just go to the city and say, I have a right to build an arena here, and I'm going to go build an arena. So that was part of the contentions last spring with that coalition. Now, that being said, the 2040 plan did stress the need to have community benefit agreements, and there are some potential avenues to sort of have community benefit agreements still exist in Charlotte even after this developer by right occurs. And so what I would say is, if you're interested in that, I do know that there is a community benefits coalition. It's its own, I think it's an unincorporated nonprofit, but it's, out there, and it's, be something that you can, communicate with. But we are now at the end. And so just be happy to take any questions. I know I kind of veered off there, but I knew you had a question about, Michelle, I know you had asked about kind of touching on development and what neighborhoods can do with development and such. So it's kind of a smorgasbord of things here today. But for those of you who are in the audience, feel free to ask questions, because I think this would be a great time to ask them and, and such.
So you guys can raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or if you have a question that you want to put in the chat. We will take a look at those as well. Rocky, one thing that I think would be helpful is, obviously there's a difference between your neighborhood association and your HOA and what they can do in their neighborhood. And so does a neighborhood association, whether they're a nonprofit or not, or incorporated nonprofit, do they have any of the same, I guess, rights as a HOA would have? So for example, if there's something in an HOA, if there's a HOA, someone is breaking one of the HOA rules, the HOA can enforce something. And my understanding is that a neighborhood association, they do not have those same privileges. Is that correct, regardless of what their status is or what their bylaws say as a nonprofit?
Yeah, more or less, that's correct. I mean, because with an HOA, there's also an added thing called CCRs. I think you can learn about, those are covenants, something in restrictions, and those are kind of, so when a HOA is created, there's a developer usually at the beginning of the stage, and it's a much more legalistic community than a neighborhood association. It's very organic. I mean, it's old school. It's kind of, it's really a volunteer organization. You want to buy a house in HOA, realtors have to like show you like all these disclaimers about what you're actually buying into. So an HOA, while, I mean, yes, the similarities are a neighborhood association is a nonprofit under North Carolina law, and a HOA association is a nonprofit under North Carolina law. And yes, that act applies to both. And yes, they have to have boards of directors and all these other things. But as far as those who live in it, there's a lot more power of the HOA and their board over your typical HOA resident than over a neighborhood association, because it's just, first of all, like, I mean, there might be some people who long stand living in that neighborhood. There could be people there today, gone today. You don't really have that, case in an HOA. Now there are ways that neighborhood associations, do kind of like try to create quality control, in their neighborhood. So some of those things are, developing relationship with their local law enforcement. So I know I've been to a number of neighborhood associations where, part of the neighborhood association meeting is a report from the local police officer from the area, right? So the police officer shows up and talks about kind of what community safety and other issues. So, I mean, now that's obviously about safety, but there are also things that neighborhoods can do. I mean, there are still like nuisance laws, there's still zoning ordinances out there. You have obviously neighborhood housing services, and obviously it's not probably a text or an email to, codes and other those folks to be able to be brought into the mix. I mean, it's a much more, and it's a little more dispersed about how you can kind of try to enforce, like someone won't mow their lawn, and so, but there is a code for having a really tall lawn. I mean, I know, does that make you a snitch in the neighborhood? Maybe, but you know what, if it comes from the neighborhood association, it's less of someone being a snitch, and it's just more of the neighborhood trying to police its own quality, right? So I think if you're in a neighborhood association is to engage and strengthen your relationships with your city liaison. So again, that could be from the police department to Michelle's department and obviously if you get to Michelle's department, codes ain't going to be that hard to get to. I don't know where they are in the building. Maybe they're on the third floor, you're on the second, they're not that hard to find. I'm sure you see each other at Showmars or whatever, or that over there on, they're probably not that hard to find, right? There's, so there are those things as well. And I mean, so yeah, I mean, like, yes, in an HOA, a board, can look at someone's lawn, and if it doesn't meet the requirements, they can fine them, they can do some things. But the board of a neighborhood association may not quite have that power, but I think your power will come from building those connections with those entities that can keep neighbors accountable to not just the community standards, but to the law itself. So I think those are, I think that would be, and so if you're attending this, you've already got one connection with the city. And I think you got a great city because it's so rich. It's so, they're allowing this type of programming. They really want to see neighborhoods empowered. They want to see neighborhoods sort of be self-sufficient in many ways. They want to give you those tools. But of course, if someone's doing stuff in some house that they don't need to be doing, what I'm talking about, then you can kind of, connect to the city to kind of enforce those rules, because there's no way that, we're not in a vigilante society, can't be doing none of that, so there's that. And again, when it comes to there's a lot of great stories in Charlotte about, neighborhoods kind of, organizing and really kind of getting things done. Now some may say they might get a little too successful. So next where I taught law school, where we were off of Wilkinson Boulevard, there was a neighborhood known as Wesley Heights. And Wesley Heights was, it was classic, 20 years ago, was, kind of bunched in with the rest of West Charlotte as a neighborhood that was struggling. A retired judge named Judge Shirley Fulton moved into that neighborhood, and she helped incorporate a Wesley Heights improvement organization. And I think they got a 501c3 status, and then they got what they call, actually something even beyond that, they got a certified housing development organization, what they call a CHODO. And so they were able to get money directly from the city of Charlotte, and they started buying houses and rehabbing the houses in that neighborhood to kind of create more, do some things with that neighborhood. Now, some people say they got a little too successful, because then the investors came in and bought out Wesley Heights, and now nobody can afford to live in Wesley Heights. But I'm saying that it definitely was a struggling community. I mean, yeah, the idea that Wesley Heights was once a struggling neighborhood is just laughable, today, in today's Wesley Heights, but not 20 years ago. And so, I do think that there are a lot of positives to organizing your community, and but obviously there's a lot more paperwork and there's a lot more compliance, and that's why you've got folks like the city of Charlotte, and the neighborhood housing services to help connect you to resources and trainings and other things that help you to build these more self-sufficient neighborhoods. So you don't have to, you can become more proactive as a community and less reactive. And I think that's really the main thing here, is to try to get you the tools to be a proactive community, because the less that the city needs to focus, that in your particular neighborhood, it means that you're doing well, and they can then turn their attention to other neighborhoods and communities that may need more help. So it's sort of, you're, I mean, I think even those of you who are attending here, I mean, kudos to you, because it's a Tuesday night, and there's a lot of other things. You'd be watching NBA basketball or something like that, or Bridgerton, I don't know, whatever that show is, I don't know, I heard about it, whatever whatever you want to do, but you're learning about how to improve your community. And of course, I got my information here. So if you got questions, just feel free to reach out. I mean, I'm not, if even it's just a simple question, if there's anything based on these slides that you looked at, just ask me. I'm not gonna, this will be, nothing. I'm not gonna charge you or anything like that, lawyers, that kind of thing. This is educational. I'm still, you can take me out of the law school, but you can't take the law school out of me, right? So as Michelle has been able to tell, it's like, yeah, he definitely was a teacher at one time, he definitely, so.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate it.
Yeah.
Rocky has been with us probably a little over a year, assisting us with these types of workshops. And as he alluded to in his presentation, there are a ton of additional workshops that we've done for neighborhood associations and HOAs that's available on our training on demand site. So when I email you all in the morning, you'll get a copy of this presentation, and I'll send you the direct link to the bylaws presentation, and then I'll send you the link to the training on demand site. And just whenever you have some time, just take a look at some of the resources that we have available there to help you with whatever it is that you're working on in your neighborhood. So, Rocky has graciously said that you can contact him if you have any questions for me, or if you have any suggestions on future workshops. that would be helpful for you, please, please, please let me know. And then we'll work to try to develop something, because our goal here is just to meet the needs of the neighborhood to, again, as Rocky stated, just to empower you all to create the types of neighborhoods that you want to live in. So I didn't see any questions. So thank you all for hanging in. I know we went a little bit over. We definitely appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. And that's it. So have a good night, everyone.